Uh, Good evening. I'm Metta Spencer. I'm here in Toronto, and I have two friends with me we are all struggling with our computers, but one of them is John Mills. And say hi, John.
Hi, Metta, and the group.
Yeah, and the other fella is Tom Cooper, who has more light on his face than John does.
Looks I apologize for
that. You're in a dark room with a lot of smoke, or you're in a steam bath someplace.
Well, there isn't a lot of light in the apartment, and I can't get a light close.
It's all right. I can try. We see a shadowy figure there, and we'll imagine the rest. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is a guaranteed basic income, which is certainly a hot topic these days. It's something that I was just talking to Tom about the fact that PBS had a segment in which he was being interviewed a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago maybe. And I believe I recognized him from that, but I didn't get to see the whole thing. Anyway, I am myself hoping to get instructed on the history and the future of guaranteed basic income, because even though I don't know much about it, I've been promoting it like hell. I mean, we have been having, this thing called How to Save the World in a Hurry, and ways of going about reducing the risk of 6 global threats to humankind, really major threats to human survival. And I had taken the position that we really can't solve a lot of these problems till we get the political support for it from people who are likely to be ambivalent at best, or more concerned about their own safety and well-being and financial security and so on. So my notion is that certain governmental, political, economic factors need to be handled along with efforts to reduce the risk of these global threats. By global threats, I mean things like pandemics and famine and nuclear war and global warming and cyber attacks and radiation explosions and so on. I have taken the view that we need to provide economic security for people, especially in a time when allegedly automation is going to be making a lot of people's jobs redundant. So here I am boosting this whole cause with very little knowledge in my background, and I hope to get informed about the whole idea. And I don't know which one of you wants to start off, but let me introduce you first. And in fact, I'd rather have you introduce yourselves so that they can see you as you speak. John, tell us a moment about yourself, please.
Metta, I had a 30-year career in IT, and during that career, I was very, 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 very comfortable. I saw what then I considered the bums on the street, and thought, there but for God go I. And I distributed money rather liberally and thought nothing of it, carried on. Never thought more about it. Then in 2005, I lost my job and joined those ranks. And there's something wrong with having to demean yourself by going into the social assistance system and basically giving up who you are. You are nobody except a number in a system, and you are giving the bare necessities to be able to live on. And it basically constricted. I'm an intelligent person, had a good career, have lots to offer society, and I was basically stuck being able to not do anything. I couldn't get a job flipping burgers because I was, you're not going to last here 2 weeks. You've lived the good life. You're not going to be around. And by the same token, once you're out of work for 6 months, you're effectively lost to the work environment. So on top of that, I was mid-50s at that point. Well, I was 60 actually. And nobody wants to hire a 60-year-old. I mean, they're going to pick up somebody 25 to 30 and train them the way they want rather than accept somebody. So I started to think about this, and I started doing a lot of reading about basic income and thought, you know, this makes perfect sense. It's a concept that has been around since Thomas Paine in the 1700s, and it almost got enacted in some way, shape, or form with Nixon in the 70s, and it just made so much sense to me that I had to do more reading and get more involved in the project, and it's just with the potential threat of automation takeover. That's one of the things, and there's lots of people who will argue the fact that it's not gonna really happen. You know, every industrial revolution has changed the scope of jobs, but jobs are still around, and unfortunately, with this industrial revolution, the jobs are going to be around, but they're going to be all service industry jobs that pay nothing. They're going to be what's happening now, the gig economy. You know, it's a problem. So, and where I was stuck, I felt that, you know, if you give me a safe floor rather than a net, I don't want to climb out of a net. I want a floor to stand, you know, something solid, something that's there all the time. I want to be able to stand somewhere safe, secure, and reach, and be able to go out and do things. And that to me is where basic income is at. And so I'm not gonna say I'm radical about it, but to me it's the only solution going forward for not only job insecurity and the gig economy, but people have got to walk into society from coming out of school heavily in debt, which is another problem that you know needs discussion. But come out of college with a floor to stand on, so that you can go and reach for the stars rather than being stuck trying to recoup from debt and you know, that kind of thing. Anyway,
right.
so that's where I am right now.
I'm 100% with you. So let me also introduce our other panelist, Tom Cooper, who I gather is very involved with the Hamilton Roundtable on Poverty Reduction. Is that the title?
That's correct, Metta.
Yeah. Okay. And I hear that John preceded you and actually convinced you of the value of basic income as an approach to poverty reduction.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. And I think John's been a bit of a pioneer in this field, certainly in Hamilton. As a little bit of background to our organization, the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction has been in existence for more than a decade now. And we're really dedicated to looking at what we can do as a community to reduce and eliminate poverty. So we work with local community groups and governments when they listen to us about policies we need to bring in to really look at reducing poverty and improving people's lives. And for me, basic income's appeal is really about restoring a sense of dignity. Here in our city of Hamilton, we have more than 50,000 people who rely on provincial social assistance programs. Many of them are on the Ontario Disability Support Program. Others are on the alternative program, Ontario Works. But to a person, they're all experiencing poverty. And that's because the government doesn't provide any type of adequacy measure to people living on social assistance. So if you're on Ontario Works particularly, rates are woefully inadequate. A single person on Ontario Works will get about $721 a month to live on. And that's supposed to cover your housing, your food, hygiene products, clothing. even being able to afford a telephone so a potential employer could call you back becomes impossible. And so we began to realize that we needed to change the system. We needed to fix social assistance, or alternatively, if we couldn't fix social assistance, maybe look at an alternative. And I think very quickly, basic income has become that alternative. About a year ago, the Premier came to Hamilton and announced that Ontario would be launching a basic income pilot project, and Hamilton was chosen as one of the 3 communities in Ontario that would launch that pilot. So we have 1,000 people in Hamilton who are now receiving a basic income.
Excuse me, are all of the people on that program in one area, or have they scattered the whole thing all over Ontario?
No, it's in 3 cities. It's in Hamilton, it's in Thunder Bay, and it's in Lindsay. And Hamilton and Thunder Bay each have 1,000 participants, and Lindsay, Ontario has 2,000 participants. It's a much smaller town, but they're hoping to see what the economic benefits to the community as a whole might be by providing that basic income. So while we have 1,000 people participating, we also have another group of people who would be considered the control group, another group of people who aren't receiving a basic income but are being surveyed by the government for comparison. And this pilot.
Let me ask you about them. When you say a control group, do you mean people who don't need assistance, or do you mean people who are getting assistance in the conventional way?
No, these are individuals who actually aren't receiving any assistance, and the government wants to talk to them to really find out about how their lives are made more difficult by not having a basic income. And so we have a group of people who are receiving an income. It could be upwards of $1,400 a month, and another group of people who aren't receiving that money. And I think from a societal point of view, it's very interesting and educational to really compare how people's housing, how people's health care is different when you receive an income versus when you don't receive an income.
Now, if you get the income, are you then expected to forego some other benefits? Or is this sort of like an additional benefit?
There's very few strings attached, and I'm actually glad the Ontario government has taken that tact. They are providing assistance to people who were formerly on social assistance, but as well as people who are working. So if people are working, they do have 50% of their basic income clawed back. But I think it's a very valuable evaluation to look at how people, particularly who are working, are using the basic income, because we know here in Hamilton, right across Ontario, there are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are going to work every single day, but they're not earning enough at their jobs to make ends meet, to provide for their families. And sometimes it's because the minimum wage is simply too low. Other times it's because people aren't getting the number of hours. And we know there's been a large growth in precarious employment, unstable work. And so basic income, as John alluded to, can be a very, very important foundation to assisting people who are working to meet their basic needs so they don't fall into the depths of working poverty.
Mm-hmm. So this thing in Hamilton has been going for what, a year or so now?
Yeah, almost a year. The first participants were signed up in August of last year, and since then, all 1,000 people have been enrolled into the program. The last people to be enrolled were in April, I believe. And so for the next 3 years, we'll be able to follow these individuals and see just how their lives change on basic income.
Mm-hmm. And you've already been acquainted with a lot of them, right? Because you've been working on poverty for a long time.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear something about the history of the idea or the other previous attempts that have been made elsewhere. John, you said that you got interested in it and started reading up on it probably earlier than Tom did. What did you read, and what did you what was your impression of the findings that existed at that point? When was this, by the way, when you started getting interested in it?
I started looking at basic income when I would say 2011 I started looking at it. 2012 is when I really started getting involved. And I read a lot going back to Thomas Paine and, agrarian thing. Thomas Paine had a concept that, when you reach 21, you should just get an amount of money because you were no longer allowed to go anywhere you wanted and start doing whatever you wanted because people had taken over the land. And previous to that, everyone, you could go anywhere you wanted. And over the ages, I have to admit, the early stuff I skimmed, but in the last probably 30, 40 years, there's been a lot more written about it. And Hugh Siegel, who is the person who devised the concept of the Ontario trial, he's been involved for 40 years. Art Eggleton has written, who's a senator, has written a lot of material on it. Scott Santons in the States is a big proponent. He put himself on a basic income. Scott Santons.
Scott who?
Santons. S-A-N-T-E-N-S.
Stampins. I never heard of him. Okay.
He put himself on a basic income through crowdfunding. And he basically was
well, that's clever.
Crowdfunding, just to prove the point. And he is a very, very vocal spokesperson on it. He was at NABIG in North American Basic Income Group Guarantee Congress in Hamilton a couple of weeks ago, and he's very vocal on it. And there's a lot of Europeans who were way ahead of the curve, quite honestly, who have a lot of YouTube videos and have done a lot of writing on it over the last 30 years.
Didn't Finland have a program of some kind?
In fact, Finland is still running it. They're running it until the end of the year. It's a two-year program. They've decided not to continue it, but I think there's a recognition that the Scandinavian countries are way ahead of us in social assistance anyway. Mm-hmm. And they have decided to not continue the concept, but that doesn't take away from what they've learned from it. Mm-hmm. And
well, is this a political move that maybe the right wing got into power or something? What would explain why they backed out?
Finland is a right wing, center of right government at any rate. But they just decided that the existing system for them right now was adequate. And it's not, I don't think that it's like they're abandoning it. They're going to learn from it. They're going to, and even if it goes towards improving their own social assistance system, it's taught them something, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But I think the whole idea behind basic income is it's an idea that allows people to be people rather than kids under a patriarchal system that they will tell you what you need rather than recognizing what you need.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think the other important piece to remember is that, in a sense, Canada already has a basic income for certain populations. And so if we look at the guaranteed income supplement for seniors, that is very similar to the concept of a basic income. It's the amount of money that people, seniors in this case, who are living on low incomes can access. that provides a similar type of financial foundation.
Mm-hmm.
We also have the Canada Child Benefit, which goes to low-income families with children. And it's an amount of money that those families can access through the income tax system that can help reduce and hopefully eliminate poverty in their lives. So I think in our case here in Canada, we've been using the idea basic somewhat strategically. Where this Ontario pilot is going to differ is really seeing how it can improve the lives of adults between the ages of 18 and 64. And so we're very excited to see where things are going. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of international interest in this idea. And we've had groups of reporters come to Hamilton, PBS News World, as you mentioned. We've had newspapers from the United Kingdom, from the U.S. NHK, Japanese public television, is coming in a couple of weeks to do a little documentary on the basic income. So we feel I think somewhat of a responsibility here in Hamilton to really try to tell the story of basic income and look at how it potentially can be used as a really important social policy tool to improve the lives of people who are experiencing poverty.
Mm-hmm. You know, some time ago, I don't even remember where I read this, or maybe I saw a video or something, but I don't remember it very well, except it was about some village in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that some program has come in. I don't know whether it's a government-run thing or a philanthropist of some kind, but they came in and they were doing an experiment with a village.
Yep.
And all the people in the village have cell phones. Apparently, that's wonderful. And every month, a certain amount of money gets deposited in your cell phone account.
Yep.
And you can spend it through, I guess you wave your cell phone around or something and it works. And they've been following the effects on the village. It seems that really wonderful things happen, that people find that they can invest their money, whatever little bit they have, they can invest it in some business or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it has been, according to the thing, whatever I read, quite a remarkable way of upgrading the whole town. And I think they said that if you go to that town, it doesn't take you 10 minutes walking around to see that this is a different kind of town from the other village down the road, because these people are not just living off the proceeds of the money they're receiving, but putting it into very creative kinds of enterprises or activities. Has anybody been watching for effects like that in Canada in this new program?
I think that the program that you're talking about, Metta, is Give Directly has a program happening in Nairobi and another one in Kenya. And that their initial trial is exactly what you were describing. People, rather than blowing their money, they went out and bought a cow. And they pooled their money with neighbors and dug a well. And they actually got busy being a community rather than being impoverished again. And they've got an enormous project going, Give Directly does, in Kenya right now, that they're really driving that concept. And the concept of cell phones, that is their banking. They don't have banks in rural Africa. They just don't. So all of their banking is done by cell phone. It's not so much waving your cell phone as you transfer funds. It's like an e-transfer in North America.
Mm-hmm.
But they are finding that women are getting involved in commercial aspects. They are the ones that are buying the cows, and it's just enabling for people rather than them using the money and just blowing it. They are actually enabling the village, enabling their neighbors, and everyone benefits from it.
Mm-hmm.
And in a much, I think, more localized way, we're seeing similar results in Hamilton from the Basic Income Pilot Project that's currently running. And people who are participating, who are receiving the basic income, are making very important choices in their lives around how to spend the money. Many are able, for the first time in a long time, to buy healthier food, and so their diets are changing. And as a result, even in these very early days of the pilot project, they're feeling healthier, and they feel their health is already improving. We have one participant who John and I know very well, who bought her first ever new winter coat after receiving a basic income. She had always had hand-me-downs or gone to secondhand stores to get her winter coat, but this time on basic income, she was able to buy a new winter coat, and she was very happy because we had quite a frigid winter. So these are the types of stories we're hearing, and we're starting to collect now. And I think for 100% of our participants here in Hamilton, and from what we've heard, the same is true in Lindsay and Thunder Bay as well. Basic income participants are seeing that having this additional income is changing their lives. But I think the biggest impact has really been around restoring a sense of dignity for people. Because when people experience poverty for extended periods of their lives, they often feel that they maybe don't have a lot to contribute, that they don't feel they have choices in their lives. And basic income is enabling people to have some choice again, and they're making very good choices.
Okay, so here we've jumped historically. I'm trying to I'd like to fill in the gaps a little bit, because you start with Thomas Paine. I didn't know he did anything about basic income. I mean, had any thoughts about that, but that's very interesting. If that's the first case you can imagine.
It actually goes back even further.
Really?
Sir Thomas More wrote about the idea of a basic income in Utopia as well. Okay. The concept of providing people with a financial foundation is very old.
Okay, so now in between, let's say jump from Thomas Paine to now, have other attempts been made along those lines? I remember when I first moved to Toronto, I'm a retired sociology professor from U of T, and I remember the year I came in, it was about 1971, I was hearing conversations about basic income. It was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And it sounded like serious talk. They were really thinking about this and trying to figure out how to do it. And then it sort of went away. And I didn't hear any more until maybe 2 years ago, if that. I don't know why it went away, but I also hear that there was an experiment in Manitoba.
Yep.
The Dauphin, is that how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
A town apparently had an experiment, and then they stopped it before it was through. And there's a story there. You can tell the story better than I can. Tell me the story. I kind of know a little about it. Somebody found some boxes in the basement or something.
That's our friend Evelyn Forget, who's a professor at the University of Manitoba. John could probably talk about the Mincome experiment a bit better, but just to lay a little bit of groundwork going up to that period, there was certainly, as you indicated, a lot of talk around basic income in the 1960s and early 1970s. And John already mentioned President Nixon's interest in it. It didn't really go anywhere in the United States. But even prior to that, Martin Luther King Jr. had talked about the idea of basic income, and again, as a way of restoring dignity and providing opportunity for people. And so these ideas were starting to percolate through society. And that's really where the Manitoba Basic Income Pilot stepped up and ran what many people consider to be the most robust basic income experiment anywhere in the world. So maybe John could take it from there, and we can have a little bit of discussion about those outcomes.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. They actually Dauphin was part of a broader experiment. They also had the experiment going on in Winnipeg.
Where?
Winnipeg.
Oh.
Dauphin is just outside of Winnipeg.
Oh.
And Dauphin was a saturation site. They offered everyone in town a basic minimum income. And it was completely voluntary. You weren't forced to sign up for it. And the ones that well, first of all, it ran for like the period of the government, basically. And the Manitoba government was replaced. Canadian government was replaced. It fell apart. They didn't do, as you said, they packed all the results of the study into boxes and put them away. And Evelyn Forget came and experimented with, or looked at the outcomes and looked at hospital records around the same period of time, and came out with all kinds of very, very interesting conclusions. But it basically ran, governments replaced, different issues took over, it went away.
And they didn't look at the results? Even after they'd done the studies, they didn't examine them?
Didn't examine them. They packed them away and put them in the archives. And Evelyn dug into them and dug into hospital records, police records, stuff like that around the same time, and came out and recognized that, the experiment was a 100% success rate. The only downside was some of the women didn't enter the workforce or re-enter the workforce, but they found that was because they stayed with their newborns longer. And how bad is that? And the other downside of it was young men entered the workforce later. But then she looked at the educational records, and Dauphin's grade 12 graduation rate was enormously inflated in that period. And those kids also went to university.
Yep.
So there's no downside to that neither. So the concept of not looking for work and people dropping out of the workforce was kind of negated by the good aspects of that. And she found that there was a much lower hospitalization rate because primarily because people weren't getting hurt as much. Well, that's exactly associated with how much security you have. Are you worried about stress? Stress contributes to that kind of thing. And all in all, the experiment was a wonderful success, and nobody recognized it at the time. And Evelyn Forget has brought that out and speaks on it eloquently all the time. She's got a new book coming out, which speaks more about it. And Dauphin was, there was a bunch of experiments in the States around the same time too. They were small local city experiments that showed similar results. They were all beneficial.
Yep.
I was talking to a guy who's a teacher at one of the community colleges here, and I mentioned that I thought this was a dandy idea, and he was much more skeptical. He said, these young people that I teach, these guys just sit around and do nothing, and they don't have any ambition, and I'm afraid that if they could get away with doing nothing indefinitely, that's what they do. He said, I don't think they're going to acquire any new motivation that they don't have now. What is your answer?
I'm sorry, Metta. At that age, he was probably exactly the same way, Parents thought of him the same way. I know when I was a kid, I didn't actually start quote unquote work until I was 28. I mean, I logged and I did some odd jobs here and there, but I didn't really find a career until I was 28. And the whole time in those days, someone like that looking at me would have been of exactly the same opinion, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, kids are kids, let them be kids.
Yeah, and the little I have read said that in fact that's generally not the thing that happens. That there's no increase in the number of people who just take the money and loaf.
Yeah,
yeah,
and that's absolutely true. And I think we are seeing a definite shift in the economy as well. And we know that millennials particularly are having more and more challenges finding permanent work, landing a career. And so this may really be a result of a lack of hope on the part of many of them. They don't feel that they're going to be better off than their parents were. And we're potentially the first generation to face that reality. And so I think there's going to be skepticism around the idea of basic income, but that's why these types of experiments are so important. What we're doing in Hamilton, what's happening in Thunder Bay and in Lindsay, as part of the Ontario pilot. But as you alluded to, there's also other experiments going on around the globe, in Finland, in Africa. There's a city in California, Stockton, California, where the mayor has launched his own basic income initiative, and he's going to provide 500 people in the city with a basic income for the next 2 years, and really try to tell the story about how it really does improve lives. So I think we'll be able to break down some of those stereotypes that exist in people's minds, and really show that people want to contribute. I've worked with individuals who experience poverty for the last 15, almost 20 years. And to a person, they all want to be part of the solution. They want to contribute. They don't want to sit around. They want to feel that their contribution is valued. And so with a basic income, people can start to do that. And even if they can't find full-time work necessarily, or the traditional sense of a career, at least they'll have a financial foundation so that they can make some important contributions to society in other ways. And many people are contributing through their volunteer work, through art, through other means, even writing, doing anything that they feel is of value, and these can all be incredibly important to society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell me the arguments that go in the other direction. Before we went live, we were talking about some organization or some person who's a leader in one of these organizations. I won't give the name. I don't know whether he wants the name given, but at any rate, someone who works in poverty issues and is not in favor of basic income. So I think we ought to hear their point of view and their reasoning. Can you elaborate?
I think I can speak to that a bit, Metta. There's a few big basic arguments against basic income. The primary one is it's a disincentive to enter the labor force or re-engage with the labor force, and that has just not been proven true in any of the results of any of the experiments that have gone on. People want to contribute. They want to be part of society. The other big issue is it's a neoliberal takeover mechanism. Okay, we'll give everyone a basic income, and we'll get rid of Medicare. We'll get rid of any, rent geared to income, any of the social redeemable values that we have. You just get rid of the whole social safety net entirely, give everyone a basic income and say, hey, okay, it's up to you, away you go. And that is probably the biggest negative about it is that aspect that it's just a way of taking away what little you have left if you're low income, and that could be the case unless people actually stand up and say, no, that's not what the concept is. There are things like police forces, fire station. If I have a fire, am I responsible for putting it out on my own? There are basic social aspects in society. That's why we live together, and it's a matter of isolating, or not isolating, but deciding what are the social factors that are communal, and we have to provide those communal things.
Yep.
And social medicine is one of those things. You have a right to be healthy, and the only way some people can be healthy is with medicine, and that should be a societal right for everybody. And it's up to you and I and Tom and everyone else that's watching this to stand up and say, yeah, those are societal needs that are outside of a bottom floor for a person being able to afford food, housing, and that's, but there is that faction of society that looks at basic income and says, it's just a plot.
Right. Well, now I read someplace
and for those.
Sorry.
Well, just to add to John's point, Metta, those assumptions are also based on a belief that the current system is working well for people, I think, and it's certainly not. As I indicated earlier, for those on social assistance, and there's more than 900,000 people in Ontario who rely on social assistance. Those rates are woefully inadequate. It leaves people in deep, deep poverty, and basically forces them to use food banks because there's not enough money provided for people to buy their own food. And so we're dealing with a broken system right now. And to say that we want to maintain that type of system that leaves people poor, that leaves people hungry, that leaves people unhealthy, I don't think is doing anybody any favors. I think we need to look at bold solutions. And from my perspective, I think basic income is one of the boldest solutions to come around in a long time. And I think we need to give it a fair shake and look at how it could potentially work for people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm with you. But I remember reading some columnist, I think in the newspaper, who said that it's very strange because this happens to be a topic about which the support comes from both the left and the right.
Yeah.
There are conservatives who are very firmly in favor of basic income. And then, of course, as you would expect, at least as I would expect, there are people on the left who also favor it. And I wonder if it is true that the people on the right who favor it do tend to think of it as something that maybe if we gave people enough money, we wouldn't have to have all of these other supplementary benefits.
That's possible. I think one of the biggest motivators for people, particularly in the business community, to support the idea of a basic income is really because of the future of work and the potential for automation taking jobs. And so that's why we see big industrialists like Elon Musk, like Richard Branson, like Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, all being very supportive of the idea of a basic income because they look down the line and see that people may not have the stable jobs they used to have. And if they don't, people are going to need some source of income to be able to continue to buy the products that keep our economy running. And so they're potentially looking at their own self-interest down the line because what we've seen, particularly over the last 10 or 15 years, is is a real polarization between the haves and the have-nots. And if that gap keeps growing, it's going to become more and more difficult for people on the bottom 99% to continue to keep the economy rolling the way it has been. So I think that could potentially be one of the opportunities ahead.
Well, let's talk about the cost. I mean, obviously the first thing that would spring to mind would be, how the hell are you going to pay for a thing like that? I suppose somebody's done some cost analysis of what is possible, and where we would get the money, and what we might have to give up in order to pay for it. What is the current state of knowledge about those kinds of things?
Metta, if I could jump back a bit, I think I'd just like to comment on the conservative the small c conservative aspect of basic income. The attraction from that point of view, you can go with the plot theory, but the attraction from that point of view is it's smaller government. You're not monitoring all these people that are receiving social benefits, and there's an enormous negative aspect of that whole thing. It takes an enormous government to monitor people on an individual basis because they are receiving money from the government. And the concept of basic income takes all of that away, which is from a conservative viewpoint, and to me, conservative is smaller government, and liberal is, it's social aspects. But that being neither here nor there. I'm sorry. What was the?
Well, I was just wondering whether it's true that the conservatives who favor basic income are people who expect that maybe if we give them enough money, we don't also need to provide other kinds of support.
Well, I mean, the small c conservatives, I don't think that they're all that concerned about taking away benefits that exist.
No,
it's a matter of getting smaller government, and that a basic income is definitely smaller government because you're not monitoring everyone. Everyone gets it, so you don't have to monitor them.
So this guy who has a theory about how it's neoliberalism creeping up on you with the idea that they're going to make you even worse off in the long run. This guy doesn't really have any ideological support from any either the right or the left. Is that right? It must be somebody's fantasy that neoliberalism is coming to take things away from you. Or am I reading you wrong?
Well, no, I think it comes from a point of view that is definitely it holds a percentage of the population very much so. They're well enough off that they don't need the, as it were, socialist system that we live in. They would do very well without Medicare. They don't need pharmacare support, which we don't have yet, except portions of the population. But honestly, I'm not concerned in terms of basic income. I'm not concerned with that portion of the population because they don't represent a whole big portion of the population.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that you think public opinion basically is in favor of this, and you don't expect any backlash or any major.
Well, there's going to be blowback to change, just like there is to any change. But I don't think that most people are against, are for putting people in jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think public opinion currently is not necessarily stable on the issue of basic income either. I think people are interested in learning more. I think they like the concept of providing people with a basic income as really a measure to restore dignity. But there are concerns, and you referenced the cost. The parliamentary budget officer federally just recently came out with a report that looked at a potential price tag of a national basic income based on the Ontario model, and that came out to about $42 billion. So it's a big
for all of Canada.
Price. Yeah, for all of Canada, it's a big price tag to it. So we can't delude ourselves that it's not, but it's also about choices, I think. And I think there's a lot of cost savings to be found in reducing poverty for our society. And we know people who are living in poverty are 3 times more likely to be sick and use the healthcare system. And we know it's far more cost effective to keep somebody out of the hospital than to deal with an illness once it's become a reality. And so if we can save some of those costs upstream instead of pulling people out of the river downstream, I think it will more than pay for itself. But again, this is part of what we're hoping to learn with the Ontario pilot. And I think there's a great opportunity here over the next 3 years. And we have a Conservative government just elected here in Ontario. And all indications are at this point that they will continue to run the pilot. They've said they're not going to cancel it in midfield, and so that's really important. I think we need to continue to work to support the people who are receiving the basic income and just do a thorough evaluation of really what these outcomes are.
So what I'm hearing you is that there really isn't the evidence yet to make a real good cost analysis where you take account of the savings in other areas, healthcare and other social, and also make. I suppose you'd want to take account of things like the capacity of people to get better jobs and that sort of thing. A lot of other benefits that would come from
Absolutely.
This to offset the cost.
And we know from the Manitoba experiment, there were definitely savings to the healthcare system. As John already talked about, people were using hospitals less. They were less sick, and they were getting better jobs. And so we know these are tangible benefits to society. And we expect we'll see the same thing in Hamilton and in Thunder Bay and in Lindsay. But no government policy of this magnitude comes in overnight either, and it took a while for universal Medicare to sort of catch on with people as well. But I look at this as very much the 21st century equivalent of Medicare, and I think we will see people really buying into the idea of a basic income for people throughout their lives, and it will be an important foundation for people to move forward.
Well, yes, and let's consider the possibility that you can't show figures that actually compensate enough to make up for the fact that it is going to be pricey, that there will be a net cost greater than offset anything you offset with all the benefits. So let's assume that that's the case. It's still a highly desirable thing, it seems to me, for just plain decency, the way the kind of society you want to live in. Then to me, the question would be, well, where would we get the extra money? And I think there are a lot of very interesting questions about taxation that should be addressed, because of the fact that we know, not necessarily just in Canada, but even more in some of the other countries that I will not name. Some neighboring countries have a little bit more inequality, but Canada's not keeping so equal either, as I understand it. Anyway, the problem of growing inequality, it seems to me, we have to take that very, very seriously and try to offset it in a number of different ways. One of which would be that, this fellow Thomas Piketty, who wrote a book, a French economist, about 5 years ago, very important book showing that the only real way to stop this growth toward inequality would be to tax wealth and not just income.
Yeah.
And I know that if we started taxing wealth, it would make a big difference. And in fact, we need to tax wealth and do other things like stop the use of offshore havens, tax havens. We had in my lecture series that I run at U of T. I used to run until recently. Every week I had a lecture series for the public, and one of the speakers was Wilson Pritchard, who's a political science professor, and his main focus is on showing how much money is taken out of every economy. Canada's not the worst by any means. Many economies, a large portion of the money that should be paid to the government for taxes is actually hidden offshore in bank accounts in the Cayman Islands or God knows where. And that if we actually did more to stop that kind of corruption, we would have money to do things that make us a little bit more civilized, such as paying for basic income.
Yeah.
So that would be my viewpoint, that we have a lot of other needs that could be met much better than we're doing it now. And I hope that we see the light.
I think, Metta, that there's much thinking inside the box, and even around basic income. Basic Income Canada Network has done some pretty important economic studies, and I expect that the results will be out. They announced many at the North American Basic Income Guarantee Congress in Hamilton, and I expect those will be out. But there's a lot of thinking inside the box, how the taxation structure runs right now. And the taxation structure that we have right now was structured decades ago around a wealthy middle class. And that middle class is eroding enormously. Yeah. You can't keep functioning on income for the government from a middle class that doesn't exist. And we've got the whole taxation structure has got to be rethought. But in the short term, we have to think about what's happening to individuals in our society. And there's lots of money to fund this. How we extract it from the economy as a country is one thing. But right now, we've got to deal with the immediate problems that are happening in society. And I think that, we need a tax overhaul. We need to look at where is the GDP coming from? How do we extract what society needs from that GDP, and not really structure it on extracting it from the middle class that is exceedingly not existing.
Yeah.
But in the short term, going forward, it's important to recognize that there is enough money to do something, and we've got to start doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good way to wind up. Although, before winding up, can you give me about 2 minutes on this you alluded to something that I didn't know anything about, except only somebody mentioned it in passing, that there was a conference on basic income recently, or some kind of meeting. Am I mistaken? I know nothing about it.
Tom, I'll let you deal with us since you were part of the organizing committee.
Yeah, Hamilton was very pleased to host the North American Basic Income Congress last month at McMaster University, and it brought together hundreds of academics and community advocates and government representatives to look at the idea of basic income. And there's lots of different versions of basic income out there, but it was, I think, a great opportunity to meet with our colleagues from across Canada and the United States and Mexico, and even further afield, to look at how we can move this movement of basic income forward.
All right, keep me posted, because it sounds like you're on a roll.
I hope so.
Hosted it there in Hamilton, good for you. And I'm not very far from Hamilton, so maybe we can stay in touch a little bit.
Great. That would be a good thing, Metta. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting conversation. I think it'll be even valuable to some other people to watch it, I hope. So thank you very much. And I don't know what we're going to do next week. I think it might be about building codes, but we have to check that out. I'm not clear about it yet, but I'm glad everybody has checked in, and I'll see how many of you have been watching this, because there's a counter on that thing. On the Facebook people, they keep track of how many people watch. So I'll know.
Great.
Thanks, guys. It's been a delight. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.